The galaxy burned. The night sky above the royal palace on Veldros Prime shimmered with the eerie glow of battle. 1,000 ships locked in a violent ballet of fire and destruction. The Coalition's armada had arrived, their relentless push to dominate the inner worlds finally reaching the heart of the Veldros Empire. Panic gripped the palace as ministers scurried like frightened insects, their words drowned by the dull roar of explosions in the distance. Princess Alara stood at the balcony, her silver hair cascading like liquid starlight over her shoulders. Her piercing violet eyes scanned the chaos with a calm that belied the storm in her chest. The war had stretched on for years, but now it was here, at her doorstep. She clenched her fists, her ceremonial armor gleaming under the pale moons. Behind her, the heavy doors of the chamber burst open. General Miris stormed in, his face pale and grim. "Your Highness, we must retreat. The palace will fall within hours. Our forces are overwhelmed." Alara turned slowly, her voice steady but cold. "And where would we go, Miris? There is no retreat left. The Coalition will hunt us to the ends of the galaxy." "But there is a way out," Miris insisted, his gaze darting nervously. "Your safety is paramount. We have one final contingency. He's already en route." Alara frowned. "Who?" Before Miris could answer, the faint hum of a small transport craft cut through the air. A sleek, battle-scarred ship descended onto the palace courtyard. Alara's heart stuttered as the ramp lowered, revealing a figure cloaked in shadow. He stepped forward, his boots echoing against the stone, his presence commanding and unyielding. It was him, the human. Alara's mind raced back to that fateful day years ago when her life had hung by a thread. She had been little more than a girl, cornered by assassins on a desolate outpost, her guards slain, her escape cut off. And then, out of nowhere, he had appeared. A soldier from Earth, part of a ragtag group of mercenaries. His precision, his ferocity, had been unlike anything she had ever seen. He had fought not for gold or glory, but for something deeper, something she couldn't quite name. He had saved her, and then he had vanished. Now he was here again, and his name came unbidden to her lips. Dane. He paused, his sharp green eyes meeting hers with a flicker of recognition. "Princess." His voice was rough, like gravel, but it carried an unspoken promise of protection. Miris stepped forward, desperate. "Dane, the Coalition forces are closing in. We need you to get her out of here. The rest of us will buy you time." Dane didn't hesitate. "Let's go." Alara bristled. "I'm not leaving my people to die." Dane's gaze hardened. "This isn't up for debate. You stay here, you die, and so does your empire. You leave, there's still a chance to fight another day." Before she could argue, the palace shook violently, the force of the blast knocking them to their knees. Dane grabbed her arm, pulling her to her feet with an ease that belied his strength. "Move." They ran through the corridors, flames and debris, turning the once grand palace into a maze of ruin. Coalition soldiers swarmed, their black armor glinting like the carapaces of insects. Dane moved like a predator, his twin blasters spitting fire and death. Alara tried to keep up, her own blade slicing through the few enemies that broke through his line of defense. They reached the landing pad, but a Coalition dropship descended, cutting off their escape. Dane cursed under his breath, spinning to face the approaching soldiers. "Stay behind me." Alara ignored him, stepping forward with her blade drawn. "I'm not a child, Dane. I won't cower while you fight." He smirked despite himself. "Still stubborn, I see." The battle was fierce, their movements a deadly dance of fire and steel. Dane's blasters roared, each shot precise, while Alara's blade hummed as it cut through the air. Together, they were unstoppable, their synergy a testament to unspoken trust. Finally, the dropship erupted in flames, the Coalition soldiers falling back. Dane didn't waste a second, pulling Alara into his ship and slamming the hatch shut. As they lifted off, the palace crumbled below them, swallowed by fire. For hours, they flew in silence, the weight of their escape heavy in the air. Alara sat in the co-pilot seat, her gaze fixed on the stars. "You disappeared after you saved me," she said finally, her voice soft. Dane glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Wasn't my place to stay. You had a kingdom to rebuild. I was just a soldier. You were more than that, she said, her voice breaking. You saved me. You gave me hope when I had none. He didn't respond, his grip tightening on the controls. Days turned into weeks as they evaded coalition patrols, moving from one hidden sanctuary to another. Alara saw firsthand the devastation the war had wrought on her people, entire worlds reduced to rubble. Through it all, Dane remained by her side, his resolve unshakable. But as the days grew darker, so did their bond grow stronger. He taught her to survive in ways she had never imagined, to fight with a ferocity that matched his own. And in the quiet moments between battles, when the galaxy seemed to pause, they found solace in each other. One night, as they hid in the ruins of an ancient temple, Alara turned to him. Why do you fight, Dane? Why do you risk your life for a princess and a people who aren't your own? He hesitated, his green eyes searching hers. Because I believe in you. You're not just a princess, Alara. You're a leader, someone worth fighting for. Her breath caught, and in that moment, the war, the galaxy, everything else faded away. She leaned in, her lips brushing his, and for the first time in years, she felt something other than despair. Their love became a beacon, a fire that burned brighter than the war around them. Together, they rallied the remnants of the Empire, forging alliances with those who had once been enemies. Alara's courage and Dane's unyielding strength inspired hope in a galaxy that had almost forgotten what it meant to fight for something greater. And when the final battle came, as they stood together on the bridge of their flagship, leading the charge against the coalition's forces, they knew they were unstoppable. For their bond, forged in the fires of war, was unbreakable. And as the galaxy watched, the princess and her human protector rewrote the stars. The battle raged on in the vastness of space, the stars eclipsed by the firepower of clashing fleets. Alara stood tall on the bridge of the resolute dawn, her violet eyes glowing with determination. Dane stood beside her, his presence a pillar of unyielding strength. Together, they commanded a fleet cobbled together from the remnants of the Veldros Empire and the defiant few who refused to bow to the coalition. Enemy frigates moving into formation called out the tactical officer. They're trying to flank us on the starboard side. Dane was silent for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. Then he said, "You'll be the kind of leader who fought for her people when no one else would. The kind who inspires others to stand and fight, even when the odds are impossible. And as for the galaxy, you'll leave it better than you found it." "I know you will." She smiled faintly. "You always make it sound so simple." "It's not simple," he said, turning to face her fully. "It's messy, and it's hard, and it's going to hurt like hell. But if anyone can do it, it's you." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was comfortable, charged with unspoken words. Then, almost without thinking, Alara reached out and took his hand in hers. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being here. For staying." Dane's fingers tightened around hers. "I told you before, I'm not going anywhere." Their moment was interrupted by the sharp beep of the ship's comms. Alara sighed, releasing his hand as she stepped over to the console. A familiar face appeared on the screen. Captain Theros, his expression grim. "Your Highness," he began. "We've intercepted a transmission from the Coalition. It seems they've named a new leader, General Kael'thor. He's already rallying their forces." Alara's heart sank. Kael'thor, he was Vorik's right hand. Wasn't he? Yes, Theros confirmed. And he's just as ruthless. Maybe more. Dane crossed his arms, his expression dark. "What's he planning?" Theros hesitated. "We don't have the full details yet, but from what we've gathered, he's calling for a final push against us. He's consolidating their forces near the Zorith Nebula. If we're going to stop him, we need to act fast." Alara nodded, her mind racing. "Understood. Prepare the fleet. We'll convene in the war room in an hour." As the transmission ended, she turned to Dane. "Looks like we don't get to rest after all. Wouldn't be a proper war if we did," he said with a smirk. Then his expression turned serious. "But Kael'thor, he's going to be worse than Vorik. We need to be ready for anything." "We will be," Alara said firmly. "We have to be." The war room aboard the Resolute Dawn was alive with activity. Holographic maps displayed the Zorith Nebula and the Coalition fleet movements, while officers debated strategies and tactics. Alara stood at the head of the table, flanked by Dane and her trusted advisors. "We can't face them head-on," General Miras said, his tone grim. "Their numbers are still too great. If we engage them in open battle, we'll be crushed." "Then we don't face them head-on," Dane said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "The Zorith Nebula is a natural choke point. If we can lure them in, we can use the nebula's gravitational anomalies to our advantage." Alara nodded. "It's risky, but it could work. If we time it right, we could trap their fleet and deal a decisive blow." "But what about Kael'thor?" Miras asked. "He's not the kind to fall for an obvious trap." "That's why we make it anything but obvious," Dane said. "We use every trick we've got. Cloaked ships, decoys, false transmissions. Whatever it takes." The room fell silent as everyone considered the plan. Finally, Alara spoke. "It's decided. We'll move the fleet to the Zorith Nebula and prepare the trap. This is our chance to turn the tide for good." As the officers filed out to carry out their orders, Dane lingered behind. He stepped closer to Alara, his expression serious. "This is going to be dangerous," he said quietly. "Kael'thor won't go down easily." "I know," she said, meeting his gaze. "But we've come too far to back down now." He reached out, brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. "Just promise me one thing." "What?" "Whatever happens, don't let this war take the fire out of you. That fire is what's keeping all of us going." She smiled softly, her hand covering his. "I promise." And as they prepared for the battle to come, Alara couldn't help but feel that, no matter what lay ahead, she wouldn't face it alone. Together, they would face the storm, and together, they would change the galaxy forever. The final days before the decisive battle felt like the calm before a storm, a tense stillness that stretched across the fleet. Alara spent hours poring over the strategy with her advisors and rallying the troops, while Dane worked tirelessly to ensure the strike teams were prepared for every possible scenario. Both knew that this would be their last stand. A victory here could shatter the Coalition's hold on the galaxy, but failure would doom them all. The Zorith Nebula loomed ahead, a swirling expanse of vibrant gas clouds and gravitational anomalies. It was a place of both beauty and danger, its unpredictable terrain the perfect battlefield for their desperate gambit. Alara stood on the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, her violet eyes scanning the nebula with a mixture of awe and dread. "They're coming," Dane said, stepping up beside her. His tone was calm, but his eyes were sharp, always assessing, always planning. "How many?" she asked. "Too many," he said with a faint smirk. "But that's never stopped us before." She smiled despite herself, her fingers brushing against his arm. "It won't stop us now." The Coalition fleet arrived like a black tide, their massive ships cutting through the nebula's swirling gases with grim purpose. At their center was Kael'thor's flagship, a behemoth of metal and fire that dwarfed even the Resolute Dawn. Alara could feel the weight of their presence, the oppressive power of an empire that had crushed countless worlds. But this time, they were ready. "Begin Phase 1, she commanded, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. The fleet sprang into action. Smaller ships darted through the nebula, laying mines and deploying decoys to draw the Coalition into the heart of the trap. Cloaked vessels moved into position, their weapons primed to strike. Alara's forces fought like cornered wolves, fierce and unrelenting, buying time for the plan to unfold. On the bridge of the Coalition flagship, Kael'thor watched with cold, calculating eyes. The hulking reptilian general was no fool. He recognized the signs of a trap, but he also saw an opportunity. If he could crush the Veldros forces here, the rebellion would die with them. "Press forward," he commanded, his deep voice reverberating through the ship. "Bring the Resolute Dawn into range. I want that ship destroyed." The Coalition fleet surged ahead, their firepower overwhelming. Alara's fleet held the line, but it was clear they couldn't hold forever. The Resolute Dawn shook violently as enemy fire struck its shields, the strain evident in the faces of the crew. "Dane," Alara said, turning to him, "is everything ready?" He nodded. Just give the word. She took a deep breath. Do it. Dane's strike team launched from the Resolute Dawn, their small, cloaked assault craft slipping through the chaos undetected. Their target, Kale Thor's flagship. It was a suicide mission, and everyone on the team knew it. But they also knew it was the only way to win. The assault craft docked with the enemy flagship, and the strike team moved with ruthless efficiency. Dane led the charge, his blasters cutting down guards with deadly precision. They fought their way to the core of the ship, where the reactor awaited. The plan was simple: disable the flagship shields and give the fleet a chance to take it down. Plant the charges, Dane ordered. His voice calm despite the chaos around him. The team worked quickly, setting the explosives around the reactor. But the enemy wasn't far behind. The sound of boots echoed down the corridor, and Dane knew they were out of time. Get back to the ship, he said. I'll hold them off. But one of his men began to protest. That's an order, Dane snapped. Go. The team hesitated for only a moment before retreating, leaving Dane alone in the reactor room. He took up a defensive position, his blasters at the ready. When the enemy burst through the door, he fought like a man possessed, every shot precise, every movement deliberate. Back on the Resolute Dawn, Alara watched the battle unfold with a mixture of hope and dread. She knew what Dane was doing, knew he was buying them time at the cost of his own life. Her heart ached, but she pushed the pain aside, focusing on the mission. Enemy flagship shields are down, the tactical officer reported. Fire everything we have, Alara commanded. Take it out now. The Resolute Dawn unleashed its full firepower, joined by the rest of the fleet. The coalition flagship was engulfed in flames, its massive form breaking apart in a cascade of explosions. The rest of the coalition fleet faltered, their morale shattered by the loss of their leader. One by one, they began to retreat. The battle was over. But as the cheers erupted across the bridge, Alara's heart sank. She turned to the comms officer. Any word from Dane's team? The officer shook his head, his expression somber. No, Your Highness. Alara's chest tightened, but she refused to believe it. Prepare a search party, she said. We're not leaving without him. Hours passed as they scoured the wreckage of the coalition flagship. Finally, they found him, battered and bloodied but alive. Alara was the first to reach him, pulling him into her arms as tears streamed down her face. You're an idiot, she whispered, her voice shaking. A reckless, stubborn idiot. He managed a weak smile. Takes one to know one. The galaxy would remember that day as the turning point, the moment when the tide of war shifted in favor of freedom. Alara and Dane became legends, their love story woven into the fabric of history. Together, they rebuilt the Veldros Empire, not as a symbol of oppression, but as a beacon of hope. And though the scars of war remained, they faced the future hand in hand, ready to shape a galaxy worth fighting for. For their bond, forged in the fires of war, would endure beyond the stars.